Over 158 million people worldwide will experience a relationship with someone who shows narcissistic traits. That's not rare, it's an epidemic. And yet, the pain it leaves behind is almost always invisible. You walk away, you block them, you try to rebuild, but something still lingers. The silence isn't silence, it's a shadow. You feel watched, judged, maybe even haunted, and you wonder, what do they think of me now? Do they feel anything? Do they regret what they did, or are they just gone? Here's the truth. A 2022 study showed that over 70% of narcissistic individuals continue to track or stalk their ex-partners, sometimes for years, without ever reaching out. Not out of love, but out of control. Because you, in their story, were never supposed to grow without them. And that's exactly why they can't let go. This video will take you deep into their hidden thoughts, long after everything ended. If you're in this situation or you've ever been, leave a like. You can also share your story below, or simply write thank you in the comments, because just surviving it is already strength. Carl Jung once said, "The brighter the light, the darker the shadow." And when you've been close to a narcissist, you've stood directly in that contrast. You might not know it, but your presence exposed their shadow, and that's why they can't forget you. According to the American Psychiatric Association, narcissistic personality disorder affects up to 6.2% of the population. But here's the deeper truth. While narcissists may seem self-absorbed or cold, studies in neuroscience, like those from the University of Zurich, reveal that they experience intense emotional reactions when their ego is threatened. Behind the mask is not just arrogance, it's emptiness, chronic insecurity, a desperate craving for validation that no amount of praise can ever satisfy. And that's where you came in. You were never just someone to them. You were chosen, not because of love in the way you understand it, but because of what you reflected back to them. Carl Jung wrote extensively about the concept of the mirror self, how narcissists use others to reinforce a false identity. When you smiled at them, admired them, forgave them, made them feel exceptional, they felt alive. But it wasn't you they saw. It was a projection, a carefully constructed illusion in which they remained the hero. And yet, you broke that illusion. At some point, something cracked. Maybe you started asking questions. Maybe you stopped chasing. Maybe you simply got tired of the one-way emotional street. Whatever it was, it triggered what Freud called narcissistic injury, a psychological wound so deep it often leads to rage, withdrawal, or obsessive control tactics. Here's what you need to know. The moment you became harder to control is the moment you became unforgettable. In therapy rooms around the world, psychologists report the same patterns. Narcissists rarely talk about their ex-partners with peace. They ruminate. They stalk silently through social media. They rehearse the past, not to understand it, but to rewrite it to convince themselves they were right and you were wrong. According to Dr. Ramani, a leading expert on narcissism, over 80% of narcissistic individuals struggle with delayed detachment, a phenomenon where they obsess over former partners, not because of love, but because they've lost access to control and validation. Think about that. It's not what you did to them that still haunts them. It's what you no longer do. Seneca warned us, "He who is enslaved to his passions cannot be free." The narcissist lives in that trap. Their need to feel superior traps them in a cycle of needing you to remain a character in their story even long after you've stopped playing the part. And here's the twist. They often feel a kind of phantom pain in your absence, not because they miss you, but because they miss the version of themselves they constructed around you. Neuroscience supports this. fMRI scans from studies published in Nature show that narcissistic brains activate in the same regions associated with reward and addiction when they receive admiration. And when that admiration is removed, the brain reacts similarly to withdrawal symptoms in substance abuse. You were their supply, but you were also the one who saw through them, and that makes you dangerous to them. That's why they still think of you. That's why, sometimes, you feel their digital presence even if you've blocked them. That's why, in quiet moments, you wonder if they've forgotten you. The truth is, they haven't. Not really. They remember every moment where they felt powerful in your presence. And they remember every moment where they felt exposed. Because exposure is what they fear most. Marcus Aurelius taught, "If someone can prove me wrong and show me my mistake, I will gladly change." But the narcissist cannot bear to be wrong. So instead of learning from the past, they twist it, rewrite it, revisit it, not to heal but to protect the fantasy. You were never just a chapter to them. You were the mirror, the stage, the audience. And now that it's over, they are still stuck in the play, rehearsing lines you'll never hear. But you've walked off stage, and that's the real power.
There's a silence that feels loud. You've felt it after weeks, months, maybe years of no contact, no calls, no texts. They've moved on, or so it seems, but something inside you whispers. They're still watching. You don't see them, yet you feel their eyes. And it's not paranoia, it's psychology. Dr. Ramani Devasula calls it narcissistic surveillance, a phenomenon where narcissists, despite appearing detached or uninterested, keep tabs on their former partners through subtle, passive channels, social media, mutual connections, even anonymous viewing tools. In fact, in a 2022 survey by Psychology Today, 67% of people who identified as narcissistic admitted to checking up on their exes regularly. They weren't doing it to reconnect, they were doing it to monitor, compare, and control from a distance. This isn't about love, it's about relevance. Modern neuroscience explains this behavior through a concept called object constancy, the ability to maintain emotional connection with someone even when they're not physically present. Narcissists often lack this ability. When you're out of sight, it disrupts their fragile self-structure. So instead of processing loss like emotionally mature individuals, they keep you alive through observation. You become an emotional placeholder, a reference point for their identity. Carl Jung wrote, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul. Watching you is easier for the narcissist than facing the absence you left, because that absence forces them to confront the hollowness that was always there. And it's not just occasional curiosity, it's obsession, masked as indifference. You may think, but they're the one who discarded me." Exactly. And that's why they watch. The discard was never closure, it was a performance. A desperate move to assert power. But now, when you don't chase, don't beg, don't fall apart, you challenge that script. And their ego hates unscripted endings. Psychologist Craig Malkin, author of Rethinking Narcissism, explains that narcissists regulate their self-worth through external reflection. You were once a mirror that made them feel admired, envied, important. Now that you're gone, they look from a distance not to understand you, but to analyze whether you're still validating them. Even silently, they search for signs. Are you sad? Are you doing better without them? Are you dating someone else? Is your glow real or a mask? Because if you're thriving, their illusion cracks. It goes deeper. fMRI studies have shown that narcissistic individuals experienced heightened activity in the anterior cingulate cortex when exposed to perceived social threats like being ignored, excluded, or replaced. In plain terms, they may not show it, but they feel it deeply, especially if you're healing, growing, moving on publicly. And here's something few talk about. They often set traps. Small breadcrumbs to check if you're still watching them too. A song on their story, a vague caption, a sudden like on a post from a year ago. These aren't accidents. They're tests, silent signals thrown into the void to see if you'll react. Because silence, to them, is unbearable, but your silence, that's pure terror. Epictetus said, "We suffer more in imagination than in reality." But in the narcissist's world, imagination is the reality. They imagine your new life, your inner thoughts, your emotional state. Not to empathize, but to control the story. They may never reach out. They may pretend you no longer exist. But behind closed screens, they scroll, they replay, they rewind the parts where they still felt in control. And they skip the parts where you said no more. And you've probably felt the pull. You've wondered if posting something might catch their eye. That's the final layer of the obsession. They don't just watch you, they train you to feel watched. But the Stoics teach us otherwise. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "It is not death that a man should fear, but never beginning to live." And this is your moment, not to perform, not to be observed, but to live beyond the eyes, watching in the shadows, because they may be stuck in your past, but you don't belong there anymore.
When you left, they didn't just lose a partner. They lost a mirror stager puppet they could pull invisible strings on. And for a narcissist, that's more painful than rejection. It's annihilation. You might think they've moved on, but the truth is, the void you left isn't empty. It's echoing. Dr. Judith Herman, one of the pioneers in trauma psychology, wrote that the loss of control is the deepest wound to a narcissistic personality, not because they loved authentically, but because your presence was proof they could still dominate someone emotionally. Your attention, your confusion, your apologies, all of it was a fuel, and now they're out of gas. You became unpredictable, and that's terrifying to someone whose identity is built on control. Freud spoke about narcissistic mortification, the internal collapse that occurs when the narcissist loses the ability to maintain dominance over someone they once emotionally manipulated. That collapse is silent, invisible. It doesn't show up in tears or breakdowns. It shows up in withdrawal, in obsessively rewriting the past, in crafting new performances to make it seem like they won. But deep down, their reflection is fractured, because when you're gone, they don't just miss the validation, they miss the version of themselves they sculpted through you. The mind of a narcissist is structured around what Epictetus would call external attachments. He wrote, "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." The narcissist can't accept that. Their ego needs to be admired, envied, praised. And when you no longer participate in that story, your absence becomes the most powerful truth they can't rewrite. Neuroscience backs this up. In a 2021 study published in Frontiers in Psychology, researchers found that narcissistic individuals experience heightened stress responses when deprived of emotional control in interpersonal relationships. In other words, they physically react to not being able to influence you anymore. Their brain enters a stress cycle. Their body tenses. The loss of emotional dominance is processed as a real threat. And here's the paradox. They may discard you, ghost you, or push you away, but they always expect you to stay energetically tethered to them. The moment you begin to detach, grow, and stop playing their game, they experience a kind of psychological whiplash. Carl Jung said, "Whatever is rejected from the self appears in the world as an event." The narcissist projects, they begin to see you as the villain, the cold one, the betrayer, because admitting that you set yourself free would be to admit their power was never real to begin with. That's not a wound they're equipped to face. And this is why your absence haunts them. It's not just silence, it's defiance. It's proof that their tactics failed, that your healing can no longer be interrupted by guilt, or fear, or longing. You're no longer a character in their performance, and they hate unfinished stories. But from your side, there's a different kind of pain. You may feel guilty for moving on. You may question yourself, replay old arguments, wonder if you could have done more. That's normal. Emotional abuse blurs boundaries. It rewires the brain. But your clarity now is a threat to their delusion. Seneca wrote, "He suffers more than necessary. Who suffers before it is necessary?" Every time you hesitate to walk away, every time you question your decision, you feed the illusion that they still hold sway over you. But they don't. Not anymore. Your strength isn't loud. It's silent. It's in the fact that you no longer react to their provocations, that you don't respond to the breadcrumb texts, that you stop checking their feed, that you stop needing closure from someone who can't even face their own reflection. And they feel it. They feel it in the pit of their stomach, when they see you smile in a photo they weren't part of. They feel it when you don't look back. They feel it when they realize they're no longer the reference point for your emotions, because control is addictive, and you were their favorite addiction. But now, you've become the one thing they never expected. Unreachable, unshakable, uncontrolled. They always come back, not because they love you, not because they've changed, but because the fantasy in their mind is still alive. The fantasy where you're waiting, the fantasy where you regret, the fantasy where they win. Carl Jung wrote, "People don't have ideas, ideas have people." And the narcissist is possessed by one idea above all, that they are irreplaceable. That sooner or later, you'll return, that your strength is temporary, that your silence is a tactic, not a truth. It's a lie they repeat like a mantra, because accepting that you moved on without them isn't just uncomfortable, it's unlivable. In studies conducted by Dr. Eleanor Greenberg, a specialist in narcissistic and borderline over 74% of individuals with strong narcissistic traits admitted to planning comeback moments even before relationships officially ended. This isn't spontaneous, it's strategic. They imagine the return before the exit is even complete. You were never meant to leave the stage. In their mind, you are on pause waiting for the next act. That's why the messages come late at night. The vague "hey, just thinking about you." The accidental like on your story. The reminder of some shared memory. They're not random. They're not innocent. These are calculated emotional hooks designed to see if you'll bite. Because if you respond, if even for a moment, to breathe life back into their illusion. Freud described this as the repetition compulsion, a subconscious drive to recreate unresolved trauma in hopes of mastering it. But narcissists don't come back to heal. They come back to reset the dynamic, to re-establish the dominance they lost when you walked away. And here's the trap. They don't just want to return, they want to be welcomed back, admired, forgiven, missed. If they can make you question your healing, even briefly, they feel powerful again. But you must understand this. Their return isn't about love, it's about leverage. Marcus Aurelius warned, if it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it. The narcissist does neither. Their apologies are performances, their promises are future fictions. They may cry, they may beg, they may even say all the words you needed to hear back when you were breaking. But now it's only a script written, not for your heart, but for your reaction. Neuroscience shows us how dangerous this is. Studies from the University of California reveal that when we reunite with emotionally manipulative partners, our brain's reward system lights up in the same pattern as an addict's during relapse. Oxytocin floods our system. Our memory becomes selective. We romanticize the highs. We minimize the damage. That's what they count on. They know you'll remember the laughter, the intensity, the connection that felt too deep to be fake. They weaponize your nostalgia against you. But here's the truth. They don't miss you. They miss who they were with you, because you once made them feel powerful, desired, admired. And your forgiveness, if they get it, will serve as proof that they were never the problem. That's the comeback fantasy, not love, vindication. Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. That includes protecting your PC van from people who once felt like home. Because sometimes, what felt like home was just a familiar battlefield. They may try again, they may wait, they may even play the long game, but your clarity is your armor. You're not cold for ignoring their message. You're not cruel for staying silent. You're not heartless for protecting your healing. You're wise, because letting them back in doesn't restore what you had. It only resets the game you finally stopped playing. There's a pain the narcissist can't name, a bitterness they don't talk about. It's not the breakup, it's not the silence, it's not even your absence. It's your growth. Because you weren't supposed to grow. You were supposed to crumble, to crawl back, to stay stuck, replaying their version of the story, asking yourself what you did wrong. But you didn't. You healed. You transformed. And in doing so, you triggered the one emotion they work hardest to hide. Nietzsche said, in individuals, insanity is rare, but in groups, it is the rule. In narcissists, however, envy is the rule. Hidden beneath charm and detachment lies a constant, gnawing fear of being left behind. And nothing exposes that fear more than someone they once controlled, becoming someone they can no longer reach. Psychologists have studied this phenomenon in detail. Dr. Sam Faknit, author of Malignance, explains that narcissists experience a specific type of envy known as narcissistic, injury-induced resentment, a volatile mix of admiration and rage directed at those who have what they can't generate within themselves. And when you begin to evolve emotionally, mentally, spiritually, they don't just notice it, they feel it. Your joy becomes an attack, your peace a threat, your freedom proof that they were never as powerful as they believed. In a study by the Journal of Personality Disorders, narcissistic individuals were shown to experience a 34% spike in cortisol levels when exposed to the success or independence of people they once devalued. Think about that. Your glow literally causes them stress, not because they care about you, because they've lost the ability to define you. Carl Jung called this the shadow's revenge. The narcissist projects everything they cannot accept about themselves. And when they see you embracing parts of your identity, they try to crush your confidence, your clarity, your voice. It destabilizes the fantasy they've built. Because if you can change, they no longer control the narrative. And they hate that. They scroll through your photos not to celebrate you, but to scan for weakness. They listen to your words, not to understand, but to look for contradiction. They hope you'll slip, fall, stumble, because your healing makes their stagnation impossible to ignore. You became the mirror again. But this time, you didn't reflect admiration. You reflected everything they refused to face: growth, depth, courage. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Look well into thyself. There is a source of strength which will always spring up if thou wilt always look there." You've done that. You've sat with your pain. You've unraveled the trauma. You've asked the hard questions they never had the courage to ask. And in doing so, you've built something they can't imitate: integrity. And that's where the real envy lives. Because narcissists are experts at image, but healing is something you can't fake. It shows in how you speak, how you breathe, how you no longer flinch at their name, how you stopped performing. And they watch it all. They may pretend not to care. But if you've felt their presence lately, if you sense their eyes still scanning your world, it's real. Because they crave what they cannot become. Seneca reminds us, the greatest wealth is a poverty of desires. But the narcissist is never satisfied. Even when they win, they feel empty. Even when they gain attention, they crave more. Your healing exposed that, because you walked away and became more peaceful, more grounded, more alive. And that's the one thing they never saw coming. Because to them, healing wasn't part of your script. You were supposed to stay broken, but instead, you became free. You've probably wondered, do they still think about me? Do they regret it? Do they understand what they did? And the answer, though tempting, is no longer the point. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate." That's what narcissists do. They never look inward. They never face the wreckage they create. Instead, they chase distractions, attention, new faces, never healing, never changing. But you stepped into the fire. You made the unconscious conscious. And that's why you're here now, free. They may still think about you. They probably do, but not with clarity, not with accountability. They think of you the way a tyrant remembers a rebellion, not with sorrow, but with wounded pride. In their mind, you were supposed to orbit them forever. The moment you stopped needing them, they lost their grip on reality. What they think now is a fragmented loop. Nostalgia mixed with denial, longing mixed with superiority. They may still spin stories about you, twist the past, pretend they're unbothered, while watching your every move from behind fake smiles or fake accounts. But none of that is power. That's attachment without access, obsession without presence, ego without impact. And here's the truth. Most people never tell you. What they think doesn't heal you. It doesn't validate you. It doesn't restore what was lost. Only you can do that. Dr. Bessel van der Kolk, a pioneer in trauma research, showed in The Body Keeps the Score that true healing comes not from answers, but from regaining agency. When you stop orienting your self-worth around their perception, something profound happens. Your nervous system stabilizes. Your identity roots itself. You're no longer acting in a play where they write the script. Stoic philosophy calls this the ultimate inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius said, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." You now see that their thoughts, their regrets, their fantasies are just shadows on the wall, echoes of a person who never truly knew you, only used you as a canvas to paint their delusions. They can say your name, but they no longer shape your story. They might hope you still check their page. They might wait for you to react. They might replay memories where they felt superior, but none of it reaches you now, because they're screaming into a void where your silence is not weakness, it's a boundary, a gate they no longer hold the key to. And yet, that doesn't mean you've forgotten. It doesn't mean you don't feel the residue of what happened. But now, that pain doesn't define you, it informs you. It's sharpened you. You've transmuted suffering into wisdom. You've turned heartbreak into perspective. That's the kind of transformation no narcissists can comprehend, because it requires the one thing they avoid at all costs: humility. Epictetus reminds us, it's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters. Your reaction was growth, grace, distance. That's power. Real power isn't control, it's detachment. They think you still care. Maybe they even hope you do. But you've stopped living in their orbit. You've stopped asking questions they can't answer. And you've stopped waiting for them to become someone they were never willing to become. That's the final power. Knowing they still think of you, while you no longer need to think of them. Not out of spite, but because your story outgrew their chapter.